The wind howled across the barren plains of Mercy's Bend like a wounded animal, carrying with it the taste of dust and death. Grace Holloway stood at the edge of her property, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon, her weathered hands gripping the porch rail until her knuckles turned white. It had been 2 years since they'd buried Samuel in the hard ground behind the barn. 2 years since the land dispute had ended with a bullet in her husband's chest. And still the townspeople whispered her name like a curse. She was 26, though the mirror showed a woman who'd lived a decade longer. The desert sun had etched fine lines around her gray eyes, and grief had painted shadows beneath them that no amount of sleep could erase. Her auburn hair, once Samuel's pride, was now pulled back in a severe bun, hidden beneath a faded bonnet that had seen too many seasons. The black morning dress she'd worn for the first year had given way to practical brown calico, but the widow's weeds might as well have been tattooed on her skin for all the difference it made to the people of Mercy's Bend. The ranch, if one could call 40 acres of struggling grassland and a handful of cattle, a ranch, stretched before her in the dying light. The fence posts leaned at drunken angles, victims of last winter's storms. The chicken coop needed new wire, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Samuel had been a dreamer, not a carpenter, and his grand plans for the land had died with him, leaving Grace with little more than debt and determination. A coyote's cry pierced the evening air, answered by another from the distant hills. Grace shivered despite the lingering heat. Nights were the worst, when the vast emptiness of the land pressed in on her small cabin like a living thing, when the walls seemed to close in and the silence became so thick she could taste it. But she'd learned to live with loneliness. It was safer than the alternative. "Mrs. Holloway." She turned sharply, hand instinctively moving to the rifle propped against the porch. Tom Morrison stood at the gate, hat in hand, his face flushed from either the ride or his purpose. She knew that look, had seen it on half a dozen faces over the past year. "Mr. Morrison." Her voice was flat as the plains. "It's late for a social call." He shifted his weight, boots scuffing in the dirt. "I was hoping we might talk. We're talking now. I mean, properly. Perhaps I could come in? I've brought—" "No." The word cut through his fumbling like a scythe through wheat. "State your business from there." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Tom was a good man, she supposed. Owned the feed store, had a steady income, attended church every Sunday. His wife had died of fever 3 years back, leaving him with 2 young boys who needed a mother. A practical match, the town matrons whispered. A solution to both their problems. "Grace, Mrs. Holloway, you know I hold you in the highest regard. What happened to Samuel was a tragedy, but you can't go on living out here alone. It ain't proper, and it ain't safe. I'm offering you a home, security, a place in town. I have a home. This," he gestured at the sagging cabin, "the broken fence, the emptiness. This ain't no life for a woman alone. People talk. Grace, they say things." She knew what they said, that she'd driven Samuel to his death with her cold ways, that she'd hidden money somewhere, gold from a robbery back east, that she'd been no better than she should be, even before Samuel died, that she practiced dark arts in the desert nights, that she'd sold her soul to keep the ranch, that she was cursed. Let them talk. I'm offering you respectability. My boys need a mother, and you need a husband. It's the natural order of things. Grace's laugh was sharp as broken glass. The natural order killed my husband. The natural order says I should give up everything Samuel died for and play mother to another woman's children. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Morrison. But my answer is no. It was no last month when you asked, and it'll be no next month if you're fool enough to ask again. His face darkened. You're making a mistake. A woman can't run a ranch alone. When winter comes, I'll manage as I've managed for 2 winters already. Good evening, Mr. Morrison." She turned and walked into the cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse and ride away, no doubt to report her refusal to the eager ears in town. Let him. She'd survived worse than gossip. The inside of the cabin was sparse but clean. Samuel's books still lined one wall, volumes of poetry and agricultural theories that had been more valuable to him than practical knowledge. His reading chair sat empty by the cold fireplace, a ghost she couldn't bring herself to exorcise. The kitchen table bore the scars of years of use, and the bed in the corner was narrow, built for one where once two had lain. Grace lit the oil lamp and set about making her meager supper, cornbread and beans, the same as most nights. The coffee was weak, stretched to last the month, but it was hot and bitter, and it kept her hands busy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds scraping across the yard like the fingernails of the dead. She was just settling down with her plate when she heard it, the splash of water from the creek that ran along the eastern edge of her property. Not the usual trickle, but the sound of something large disturbing the water. Grace froze, listening. Could be a deer, or one of her cattle wandered off. Could be, but the war and the frontier had taught everyone to assume the worst first and be pleasantly surprised later. She grabbed the rifle, checking it was loaded, and eased open the door. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the scrub grass. The creek was about a quarter-mile from the cabin, hidden by a rise and a stand of cottonwoods that were the only green things for miles. Grace moved quietly, a skill learned from necessity. The desert had its own language. Every rustle, every silence had meaning. As she crept closer to the creek, she saw the glow of a small fire through the trees. Her jaw tightened. Drifters were common enough, but they usually had the sense to avoid settled land. This was either someone very stupid or very bold. She circled wide, approaching from downwind, through the cottonwood branches. She could make out a figure by the fire, a man, tall and lean, tending to a coffee pot. A horse was hobbled nearby, a dusty bay that had seen hard miles. The man's back was to her, but something in his stillness, the way he held himself, spoke of awareness. "That's far enough," she called out, rifle raised. "You're on private land." He didn't startle, didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he turned slowly, hands visible, and in the firelight, she saw his face. The first thing she noticed was the scar, a pale line running from his left temple to his jaw, cutting through a week's worth of dark stubble. His hair was black as a crow's wing, falling past his collar in a way that suggested scissors were a luxury he couldn't afford. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold, dark as the desert night and holding something that made her finger tighten on the trigger. Not threat, exactly. Something else, something that made her acutely aware of her isolation, of the thinness of her dress, of the way the firelight played across his weathered features. "My apologies," he said, and his voice was like whiskey and smoke. Creek looked public enough. I'll move on. He should move on. Every instinct screamed at her to order him off her land, to watch him pack up and ride away. But something held her there, rifle half raised, caught in the amber of his gaze. "Creek's low," she heard herself say. "There's better water 5 miles south. I'm obliged for the information." He didn't move, didn't look away. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Though this seemed sufficient for my needs, and what needs would those be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Coffee, rest. The usual needs of any traveler. Travelers stick to the road. Some do." The silence stretched, taut as wire. Grace knew she should leave, knew every second she stood there was another thread in the web of gossip that would surely follow. A widow, alone with a strange man in the darkness. The scandal would feed the town for months. "I'll be gone by dawn," he said finally, turning back to his coffee pot. It was a dismissal of sorts, or perhaps a mercy. Grace backed away, keeping the rifle trained on him until the darkness swallowed the fire's glow. But even as she walked back to her cabin, even as she barred the door and checked the windows, she could feel those eyes on her, dark and knowing and utterly without apology. She didn't sleep that night. Every sound might be footsteps, every shadow a threat. But beneath the fear was something else, something she didn't want to name. When dawn finally came, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. She found herself at the window, watching the cottonwoods. The stranger was gone, the fire cold. No trace left but some disturbed earth and the memory of eyes that had looked at her and seen. What? Not the grieving widow, not the stubborn woman who refused to know her place. Something else. Something that made her press her fingers to her lips and wonder why her hands were shaking. Grace Holloway had refused every man who'd come calling since Samuel's death. She'd built walls of propriety and grief, had wrapped herself in the armor of widowhood and solitude. But standing there in the morning light, watching the empty place where a stranger had made camp, she felt the first crack in those defenses. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the desert wind, she could swear she heard the sound of hoofbeats heading away from Mercy's Bend, taking with them a pair of dark eyes that had looked at her not with pity or possession, but with recognition, as if he'd seen past the widow's weeds to something wild and dangerous underneath, as if he'd known, with just one glance, exactly what she'd been hiding from herself. The stranger rode into Mercy's Bend 3 days later on a Tuesday morning, when the sun was already brutal and the dust hung in the air like a curtain. Grace saw him from the general store window where she was haggling with Mr. Peterson over the price of flour. The bay horse picked its way down Main Street with the careful gait of an animal that had learned caution, and its rider sat easy in the saddle, hat pulled low against the glare. "That's him, Mrs." Morrison hissed to Mrs. Baker near the pickle barrels, the drifter Tom saw out at the Holloway place. Grace kept her eyes on the ledger, but her hands stilled on the counter, through the window's reflection. She watched him dismount in front of the Lucky Dollar Saloon and loop his reins over the hitching post. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years in the saddle, of nights spent under stars and mornings that came too soon. Grace Holloway, Mrs. Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts like a rusty blade. "Tom tells me you had a visitor the other night. A trespasser," Grace corrected without turning. Who moved on when asked? Alone at night with a strange man. What would poor Samuel think? "Samuel's dead," Grace said flatly. His thoughts trouble no one anymore. The shocked silence that followed gave her enough time to complete her transaction and gather her purchases. But as she stepped out into the blazing sun, she nearly collided with a solid wall of man. He steadied her with one hand on her elbow, the touch brief and impersonal, but it sent heat racing up her arm nonetheless. This close, she could smell leather and trail dust, see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into far horizons. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "My apologies." "Mr." She waited, but he offered no name. "We meet again." "Seems so." Those dark eyes held a hint of amusement. The water 5 miles south was as good as you promised. Around them, the town had gone still. Grace could feel the weight of watching eyes, the eager ears straining for any morsel of scandal. She should walk away, should cut him dead and maintain what little reputation she had left. "You planning to stay long in Mercy's Bend?" she asked instead. "Long enough. The Lucky Dollar has rooms. Mrs. Chen runs a clean establishment. I'm obliged for the recommendation." He stepped aside to let her pass, but as she did, he added quietly, "Though I've found the best accommodations are often the ones nobody recommends." Heat flooded her cheeks, and she walked quickly to her wagon, aware of his gaze following her. As she arranged her purchases in the bed, she caught sight of Sheriff Wilson watching from his office doorway, his expression thoughtful. Beside him stood Judd Haynes, all 300 pounds of him squeezed into a suit that had fit him 20 years and 50 pounds ago. Judd had been after her land since before Samuel was cold in the ground. He'd offered to buy it, to manage it for her, to marry her and solve all her problems in one convenient transaction. He'd been Samuel's rival in the land dispute, though nothing had ever been proved about his involvement in her husband's death. The law in Mercy's Bend was as flexible as Judd's morals, bending to accommodate those with money and influence. Grace climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins. but Judd's bulk blocked her path. "Mrs. Holloway," he wheezed, mopping his florid face with a handkerchief. "A moment of your time. I have chores waiting. Mr. Haynes." Always so industrious, Samuel was a lucky man. His piggy eyes glinted. While he lived. "Anyway, I hear you've been entertaining visitors out at your place." "News travels fast. It's a small town. We look after our own." He leaned closer, and she could smell the pomade in his thinning hair, the whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. A woman alone can find herself in unfortunate situations, compromising situations, the kind that might affect her standing in the community, her ability to hold on to property. "Is that a threat, Mr. Haynes?" "Merely an observation. You'd find life much easier with a protector, a husband who could shield you from gossip, handle the business aspects of ranching that are clearly beyond your delicate capabilities." Grace's hands tightened on the reins until the leather cut into her palms. "My capabilities have kept that ranch running for 2 years. Barely running. Everyone knows you're one bad season from bankruptcy. I'm offering you a solution." "You're offering me a cage." His face darkened. "You do well to consider my proposal. Grace, my patience isn't infinite." "Neither is mine. Good day, Mr. Haynes." She slapped the reins, and the horses started forward. Judd had to jump aside, surprisingly agile for his size, cursing as dust coated his expensive boots. As she drove past the saloon, she caught a glimpse of the stranger lounging against the bar, watching her through the window. He raised his glass in a small salute, and despite everything, she felt her lips twitch toward a smile. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the sun a hammer on her back, the empty land stretching endlessly in every direction. By the time she reached the ranch, her dress was soaked with sweat and her throat parched. She unhitched the horses, rubbing them down and turning them out to graze before hauling her purchases inside. The cabin felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in with the weight of solitude. Grace busied herself putting away supplies, but her mind kept drifting to dark eyes, and a scar that spoke of violence survived. She'd seen plenty of drifters over the years, men broken by war or whiskey or women, men running from the law or themselves. But there was something different about this one, a stillness that suggested not defeat but patience, a watchfulness that saw too much. That evening, as she sat mending a torn shirt by lamplight, she heard horses approaching. Her hand went to the rifle, but the knock that came was perfunctory. Official. "Mrs. Holloway? Sheriff Wilson. Mind if I come in?" She opened the door to find the sheriff flanked by 2 deputies, their faces grave. Wilson was a decent man, as lawmen went, but he knew which side his bread was buttered on. "Evening, Sheriff. What brings you out here?" "Just checking on folks outside town. There's been some concern about a drifter in the area. Man calling himself Eli Mercer." Eli. The name suited him somehow. Short, sharp, giving nothing away. "I wouldn't know about that." Wilson's weathered face creased in what might have been sympathy. "Grace, you're a widow living alone. Nobody'd blame you for being cautious about strangers. If this man's been bothering you, no one's bothering me." "Sheriff, Tom Morrison says different. Says this Mercer was camped on your land. He moved on when asked. And now he's in town, taking a room at the Lucky Dollar. Folks are wondering why a man would ride past Mercy's Bend just to double back." Grace met his eyes steadily. "Maybe he forgot something." One of the deputies snickered, earning a sharp look from Wilson. "This isn't a joke, Mrs. Holloway. We don't know anything about this man. Could be wanted. Could be dangerous. Could be he's just a man looking for work and a hot meal. Could be." Wilson shifted his weight. "But I'd feel better if you'd accept some protection. Judd Haynes has offered to send some of his men—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "I don't need Judd Haynes's protection or anyone else's." Wilson sighed. "You're a stubborn woman, Grace Holloway. It's kept me alive this long." After they left, Grace stood in the doorway, watching their dust disappear into the darkness. The night was alive with sound: coyotes hunting, owls calling, the endless whisper of wind through sage. Somewhere out there, Eli Mercer was bedding down in a rented room, and the thought sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She was just about to close the door when movement caught her eye. A rider, motionless on the ridge that overlooked her property. Too far to make out features, but she knew with a certainty that defied logic who it was. They stayed like that for a long moment, separated by distance and darkness and all the reasons this was dangerous. Then he touched his hat brim, wheeled his horse around, and vanished into the night. Grace closed the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. She'd been dead for 2 years, going through the motions of living without feeling anything but grief and grim determination. But now a stranger with scarred hands and knowing eyes had ridden into her carefully ordered existence, and she could feel something stirring in the ashes of her heart, something that felt dangerously like hope, something that felt even more dangerously like hunger. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering that brief touch on her arm, the heat of him standing close. In 2 years, no man had touched her except in the formal rituals of greeting. She'd wrapped herself in widow's armor so thoroughly she'd forgotten there was a woman underneath. But Eli Mercer had looked at her and seen through the armor as if it were made of glass. And God help her, she wanted him to look again. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering in the distance like a promise or a threat. Grace blew out the lamp and lay down fully dressed, listening to the approaching thunder. Change was coming to Mercy's Bend, riding in on a bay horse with dust on its coat and secrets in its saddlebags. And despite all her careful defenses, all her hard-won independence, Grace Holloway was beginning to suspect she wouldn't survive it unchanged. In town, in a narrow room above the Lucky Dollar, Eli Mercer sat by the window cleaning his guns by moonlight. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his mind was elsewhere, on auburn hair severely bound, on gray eyes that held storm clouds, on a woman who stood alone against the world and made it look like choice rather than necessity. He'd come to Mercy's Bend following rumors of easy pickings, a widow with a land and no protection. What he'd found was something else entirely. Grace Holloway wasn't prey. She was a force of nature wrapped in calico and propriety, and he was beginning to suspect that he was the one in danger. But then, danger had always been his compass, and he'd followed it too long to change course now. Lightning split the sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the dust from the streets and filling the air with the scent of sage and possibility. The whispers followed Grace through town like tumbleweeds caught in her skirts. 2 weeks had passed since Eli Mercer's arrival, and Mercy's Bend had worked itself into a fever of speculation. Every glance he cast her way in the street, every touch of his hat brim when their paths crossed, was dissected and analyzed by the town's gossips until Grace felt like a specimen under glass. She'd taken to shopping early, when the streets were empty save for shopkeepers sweeping their stoops. But even caution couldn't shield her from Reverend Matthews, who intercepted her outside the church on a Sunday morning when she'd thought to slip in late and leave early. "Mrs. Holloway," he intoned, his cadaverous face arranged in lines of disapproval. "A word, if you please." Grace stood in the harsh morning light, aware of the congregation filing past, their whispers rising like smoke. "Reverend, it grieves me to see you straying from the path of righteousness. A widow must be above reproach, as Caesar's wife. I wasn't aware I was below it." His thin lips compressed. "This association with the stranger, it gives rise to talk. People will talk regardless. They've been talking since Samuel died. With good reason, it seems." He leaned closer, and she smelled peppermint and brimstone on his breath. "You were seen riding out with him yesterday, alone." Grace's jaw tightened. She had ridden out with Eli to show him the eastern boundary of her land where someone had been cutting her fences. He'd repaired them with efficient skill while she held the posts, working in companionable silence that had felt more intimate than any conversation. Mr. Mercer was helping with repairs, unless the church would prefer to send someone. The church provides spiritual comfort, not manual labor. and certainly not the kind of comfort this man seems to be offering. Heat flooded her cheeks. You go too far, Reverend. And you not far enough in the other direction. I'm warning you. Grace, continue down this path, and you'll find the doors of this church closed to you. Then I'll pray under the open sky. I believe God hears better there anyway. She turned and walked away, leaving him sputtering on the church steps. But her defiance was a fragile thing, crumbling as she reached her wagon and found Judd Haynes waiting beside it, picking his teeth with a gold toothpick. Trouble with the Reverend? He asked pleasantly. Can't say I'm surprised. Man has fixed notions about proper behavior. What do you want, Judd? Same thing I've always wanted, to help you. He stepped closer, blocking her path to the wagon seat. You're making things difficult for yourself, Grace. First refusing every decent proposal that comes your way. Now carrying on with this drifter. I'm not carrying on with anyone. No, then why'd he spend 3 hours at your place yesterday? Why's he been asking questions about your husband's death? That stopped her cold. What kind of questions? Judd's smile was unpleasant, the kind that stir up old grief. Though I wonder what he'd think if he knew the whole truth about Samuel's passing. There's nothing to know. Samuel was killed in a dispute over water rights. The killer was never found. Never found. Convenient. That. He leaned against the wagon, his bulk making it creak. Course, some might say Samuel brought it on himself. Man should know better than to challenge his betters, should know when to back down. Accept a reasonable offer. Your offer, you mean? I tried to help him, same as I'm trying to help you, but Holloways always were too proud for their own good. Grace's hands clenched in her skirts. Samuel's pride got him killed. I won't make the same mistake. No? Then why refuse my proposal? I'm offering you everything. Security, position, wealth. All you have to do is sign over the deed and become Mrs. Judd Haynes. Your debts disappear. Your reputation's restored. And you live in comfort for the rest of your days. In your bed. His face flushed. That's part of marriage. Yes, though I'd be considerably gentler than a man who spent years fighting other people's wars. Grace went still. What do you know about Eli Mercer? Enough. Man doesn't get scars like that picking flowers. He's trouble. Grace, the kind that ends with blood and regret. Like Samuel's kind of trouble? Judd's eyes narrowed. Careful. Accusations like that need proof, and grief can make a woman say foolish things, things she might regret when she's standing alone with nothing but pride to keep her warm. He tipped his hat and waddled away, leaving Grace shaking with rage and something that might have been fear. She climbed onto the wagon seat and drove out of town too fast, earning disapproving looks from the Sunday crowd. The ranch felt like sanctuary after the poisonous atmosphere of town. She tended the horses, checked the mended fences, tried to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of chores. But her mind kept circling back to Judd's words, to the questions Eli had been asking. She was drawing water from the well when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her hand went automatically to the pistol she'd taken to wearing, but relaxed when she recognized the bay horse and its rider. Eli dismounted at the gate, waiting for permission to enter. He was dressed for work in worn denim and leather, the gun on his hip as much a part of him as his hands, those hands that had mended her fences with surprising gentleness. Thought you might need help with the barn door, he said. Noticed it was hanging crooked. She should send him away, should protect what was left of her reputation. Instead, she heard herself say, there's tools in the shed. They worked through the afternoon, Eli handling the heavy lifting while Grace held boards and passed nails. He was a man comfortable with silence, but she found herself filling it with questions. You were in the war? Both sides, at different times. He didn't look up from the hinge he was adjusting. Started with the Union, ended with whoever was paying. A mercenary. A survivor. He tested the door's swing. Satisfied. Man does what he must to keep breathing. And after, what brought you west? His hands stilled. Same thing that brings most men, running from something or toward it. Which are you? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed despite the layers of fabric between them. Haven't decided yet. The air grew thick with unspoken things. Grace turned away, busying herself with gathering the scattered tools. Behind her, she heard him move, felt his presence like heat at her back. "Why do you stay?" he asked quietly. "This land's killing you by degrees. Town treats you like a pariah. Why not sell and start fresh somewhere else?" "Because this is all I have left of him." The words came out raw, honest. Samuel died for this land. Leaving would make his death meaningless. Was he worth it? "You're Samuel." She turned to face him, surprised by the question. He was gentle, kind. He read poetry by firelight and dreamed of making the desert bloom. A bitter smile touched her lips. He was also weak, couldn't stand up to men like Judd Haynes, couldn't protect what was his. "So you do it for him." "I do it for me." The admission surprised her. "Maybe I started out of duty, but now, this is my land, my fight, and I'll be damned if I let them take it." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went bone deep. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step back, and touched her cheek. His thumb was calloused, rough against her skin, but the touch was infinitely gentle. "You're stronger than you know. Grace Holloway." Her breath caught. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with tenderness, since she'd felt anything but the weight of duty and expectation. She swayed toward him, drawn like a moth to flame, and saw answering heat in his eyes. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as thunder after lightning. His mouth was firm, demanding, tasting of coffee and something wild. Grace's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as the world tilted off its axis. He backed her against the barn wall, caging her with his body, and she felt deliciously trapped, deliciously alive. Then thunder cracked overhead, real thunder this time, and they broke apart. Rain began to fall in fat drops, quickly becoming a downpour. Eli grabbed her hand, pulling her into the barn just as the sky opened up. They stood in the dim interior, breathing hard, rain drumming on the roof. Grace's lips felt swollen, her skin too tight for her body. She could still taste him, still feel the imprint of his hands. "I should go," he said roughly. "The rain isn't what I'm worried about." He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking more unsettled than she'd ever seen him. "You're a good woman, Grace. You don't need my kind of trouble. Maybe I'm tired of being good." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You don't know what you're saying, don't know what I am. Then tell me." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring out at the rain, he began to speak. "I've killed 23 men, started in the war, didn't stop when it ended, hired my gun out to whoever paid best, railroad barons, cattle kings, men with more money than conscience, done things that would turn your stomach." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you kissed me like you were drowning and I was air, because I want to do it again, and because you deserve to know what you're inviting into your bed." Heat flooded her at his blunt words. "I didn't invite you to my bed." He turned to look at her, eyes dark with promise. "No? Then why are we standing here with rain between us and propriety? Wanting things we shouldn't want?" She had no answer for that, could only stand there trembling as he approached, stopping just out of reach. "I'll ask you a question. Grace Holloway, and you think hard before you answer." His voice was low, intense. "You ever wanted someone to touch you not because it's proper or expected, but because they can't help themselves? Because the wanting is like fire in their blood?" The barn felt too small, the air too thin. Grace's hands shook as she raised them to her burning cheeks. "I should tell you to leave. Yes. Should bar my door and never speak to you again. That would be wise. I've been wise for 2 years, proper and respectable and half dead with it." She met his eyes, saw her own hunger reflected there. "Yes, God help me, yes." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. This kiss was different, deeper, more desperate, full of promises that would damn them both. Grace clung to him, letting herself drown, letting herself burn. When he finally pulled away, they were both shaking. "I won't ruin you," he said hoarsely. "Won't take what you'll regret giving." "Then what?" "I'll court you." A wry smile touched his lips. "Properly, or as properly as a man like me can manage. Let them see it. Let them talk. And when you're sure, absolutely sure, then we'll discuss beds and the wanting that keeps me awake at night." Grace laughed, surprising herself. "You think courtship will quiet the gossip?" "No, but it'll give them something new to chew on. And it'll give me an excuse to keep fixing your fences." The rain was lessening, sky lightening toward evening. Soon he'd have to go, leave her to face the night alone with the memory of his mouth on hers. But for now, they stood together in the barn's shelter, listening to the storm pass over. "Judd Haynes says you've been asking about Samuel's death," she said quietly. His expression hardened. "Man threatens what's mine. I like to know his history. I'm not yours." "Aren't you?" He touched her lips gently. "Maybe not yet, but Grace, I've got a feeling about Haynes. About what happened to your husband. Will you trust me to look into it?" She thought of Samuel, gentle Samuel, who died with a bullet in his chest and her name on his lips. Thought of Judd's oily smile and grasping hands. "Yes," she whispered. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Eli kissed her once more, softly. A promise rather than a taking. "Lock your doors tonight," he said, "and keep that pistol close." Then he was gone, riding into the sunset like something out of the dime novels Samuel used to mock. Grace touched her lips, still feeling the burn of him, and wondered if she'd just saved herself or signed her own death warrant. Either way, there was no going back now. The widow had let the wolf into her heart, and God help anyone who tried to tear him out. The nights were the worst. Grace lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while her body burned with unfamiliar hunger. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind made her think of him. Eli's hands, rough and gentle at once, his mouth demanding and giving, the solid warmth of him pressed against her in the barn. She'd been dead for 2 years. She realized, going through the motions of living while her heart lay buried with Samuel. But now something wild and dangerous was clawing its way out of the grave, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. By day, she threw herself into work with desperate energy. The ranch had never been so well tended, every fence post straight, every tool cleaned and oiled. But work couldn't quiet the trembling in her hands, or the ache that settled low in her belly whenever she thought of dark eyes and scarred hands. A week passed before she saw him again. She was in town, loading supplies, when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in excitement. Grace's heart clenched as she pushed through the throng, fearing the worst. Eli stood in the street, blood dripping from his knuckles, facing 3 of Judd Haynes's men. One was on the ground, clutching his jaw. The other 2 circled warily, hands hovering near their guns. "That's enough." Sheriff Wilson pushed through the crowd, hand on his pistol. "What's this about?" "Ask them," Eli said calmly, never taking his eyes off the men. "They jumped me coming out of the telegraph office." "That's a lie." One of the men spit. "He started it. Been sniffing around, asking questions about Mr. Haynes's business." "Since when is asking questions a crime?" Eli flexed his bloodied hand. "Unless Haynes has something to hide," the crowd murmured. And Grace saw Judd himself pushing forward, his face mottled with rage. "This man is a troublemaker, sheriff, a drifter with no stake in our community. I demand you run him out of town." "On what grounds?" Wilson looked tired. "Man has a right to defend himself. He's been harassing our women folk." Judd's eyes found Grace in the crowd. "Ask the widow Holloway. This saddle tramp won't leave her be." All eyes turned to her. Grace felt the weight of their judgment, their eager anticipation of scandal. She could denounce him, protect what was left of her reputation. It would be so easy. Instead, she stepped forward, chin raised. "Mr. Mercer has been nothing but helpful. He's repaired my fences, fixed my barn door. If that's harassment, then I welcome it. The crowd buzzed like disturbed bees. Judd's face darkened. You defend this killer? I defend any man who's shown me kindness. She met Eli's eyes across the crowd. Which is more than you've ever done. Mr. Haynes. Why you— Enough. Wilson stepped between them. Everyone disperse. Mercer, get those hands seen to. Haynes, keep your boys on a tighter leash. The crowd reluctantly scattered, but Grace felt their eyes following her as she approached Eli. Up close, she could see a cut above his eye, blood on his shirt. Come on, she said quietly. Doc Morrison's is just down the street. I've had worse. Don't be stubborn. His lips quirked. Pot and kettle, Mrs. Holloway. But he let her lead him to the doctor's office, where Tom Morrison's father cleaned and bandaged his hands with professional detachment. Grace waited outside, ignoring the whispers of passers-by, until Eli emerged. I'll ride back with you, he said. People will talk. Let them. They retrieved their horses and rode out of town side by side, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Grace was acutely aware of him beside her, the easy way he sat his horse despite his injuries, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. Why were you at the telegraph office? She asked as they neared her property. Sending inquiries about Judd Haynes. Man doesn't get that rich in a town this small without stepping on some backs. And someone doesn't want those inquiries sent? He showed her his bandaged knuckles. Which tells me I'm on the right track. They reached the cabin as the sun was beginning its descent. Grace knew she should send him away. Knew every moment he stayed increased the damage to her reputation. Instead, she heard herself saying, You should clean up properly. There's a basin out back. She busied herself with starting supper while he washed, trying not to think about him shirtless in her yard, water sluicing over scarred skin. When he appeared in the doorway, shirt hanging open, she nearly dropped the coffee pot. Grace! The way he said her name made her shiver. She turned to face him, saw the want naked in his eyes. We can't, she whispered. I know, but he moved toward her anyway, drawn by the same magnetism that pulled at her. Doesn't stop the wanting. No. Her voice was barely a breath. It doesn't. He stopped just out of reach, hands clenched at his sides. Tell me to go. I can't. Grace, I dream about you. The confession tumbled out, raw and desperate. Every night, I wake up reaching for something that isn't there. I've been faithful to a dead man for 2 years, and now— She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. I'm tired of being cold, tired of being alone, tired of doing what's right and proper and expected. You don't know what you're asking, don't I? She moved closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. I'm not a child. Eli, I was married. I know what happens between men and women. Do you? His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb stroking along her jaw. Because what I want from you, what I dream about, it's not gentle, not proper, not what a good husband gives his wife in the marriage bed. Heat pooled low in her belly. Maybe I don't want gentle. He made a sound like pain, pulling her against him. His kiss was fierce, consuming, nothing like the sweet peck Samuel had given her. This was possession, pure and simple. She gasped into his mouth, fingers digging into his shoulders, feeling the world spin away. He lifted her onto the table, stepping between her legs, and even through layers of fabric she could feel him, hard and wanting. His mouth moved to her throat, and she arched back, a sound escaping that she'd never made before. Please, she gasped, not even sure what she was begging for. Not like this. His voice was rough against her skin. Not with you. He pulled back, breathing hard, and she wanted to weep with frustration. Why? Because you deserve better than a kitchen table and a quick tumble. Because when I have you, and I will have you, Grace, it'll be proper. In a bed, with rings and vows and all the things that'll keep the vultures from tearing you apart after. I don't care about the vultures. I do. He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I care about you, more than I've cared about anything in a very long time. So we do this right, or not at all." She laughed, surprising them both. "You want to marry me?" "Want?" He rested his forehead against hers. "Want doesn't begin to cover it, but yes, when you're ready, when you're sure." "The town will riot. A widow and a gunfighter. Let them—" His thumb stroked her cheek. "I've faced worse than small-town gossip." A noise outside made them both freeze. Eli moved quickly, shirt already buttoned, hand on his gun as he peered out the window. "Stay here," he ordered, slipping out the door. Grace grabbed her rifle, following despite his command. In the dying light, she could see riders approaching, 4 of them, moving with purpose. Eli stood in the yard, relaxed but ready. "Evening, gentlemen. Little late for a social call." The riders spread out in a half-circle. Grace recognized them as more of Judd's men, hard cases with dead eyes and ready guns. "Mister, Haynes wants a word with you," one said, "private-like. He knows where to find me. He wants you to come to him, now. And if I decline," the man's hand moved to his gun, "then we got a problem." Grace stepped onto the porch, rifle visible. "There's no problem here. You're on my land. I'll ask you to leave. This don't concern you, woman. Everything on my land concerns me." She raised the rifle slightly. "And I'm a fair shot. Samuel saw to that." The tension stretched taut, violence hanging in the air like smoke. Then Eli laughed, low and dangerous. 4 against 2. Almost fair odds. He looked at the spokesman. "Tell Haynes I'll meet him. Tomorrow noon. In town where it's public. He wants to talk. We talk like civilized men." The riders exchanged glances. Finally, the spokesman nodded. "Tomorrow noon. Don't be late." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving dust and threat in their wake. Grace lowered the rifle with shaking hands. "You shouldn't have done that," Eli said quietly. "Stand up for you? Why not? You've been standing up for me." He climbed the porch steps, pulling her into his arms. "Brave woman. Foolish, but brave. What will you do tomorrow? Listen to what he has to say. Learn what I can." He tilted her chin up. "Don't look so worried. I've survived worse than Judd Haynes. He's dangerous. He may have killed Samuel. I know." His expression hardened. "Which is why I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, nothing will happen. Promise me." His grip tightened. "If something happens, you take whatever money you can scrape together and run. East, west, doesn't matter. Just get away from here. I won't run. This is my land. Land isn't worth dying for. Samuel thought it was. Samuel was wrong." He kissed her hard, desperate. "Promise me." She pulled back, studying his face in the fading light. "Only if you promise to come back. Always." He touched her cheek one last time. "Lock the doors. Keep the rifle close." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Grace stood on the porch long after the sound of hoofbeats faded, the rifle heavy in her hands. Inside, the cabin felt too empty, too quiet. She tried to eat but couldn't stomach food. Tried to read one of Samuel's books, but the words swam before her eyes. Finally, she gave up and prepared for bed, though sleep seemed impossible. She'd just blown out the lamp when she heard it, the soft scrape of a boot on wood. Grace lay still, heart pounding, hand creeping toward the pistol under her pillow. The door creaked open. A shadow slipped inside, moving with careful stealth. Grace waited until it was close, then rolled out of bed, gun raised. "Don't move. Easy." Eli's voice, warm with amusement. "Just me. What are you doing here?" "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about you alone out here." He moved closer, visible now in the moonlight from the window. "Thought I'd keep watch. I don't need protection." "No." He took the gun from her unresisting fingers, set it aside. "But maybe I need to protect you anyway." They stood there in the darkness, the bed between them like a promise or a threat. Grace was acutely aware that she wore only a thin nightgown, that they were alone. That want was a living thing beating between them. "You should go," she whispered. "I should." He didn't move. "Tell me to go, Grace." But she couldn't. Could only stand there trembling as he rounded the bed, as his hands found her waist, as he pulled her against him. "One kiss," he said roughly. "Then I'll go, I swear." She nodded, unable to speak. His mouth found hers in the darkness. Gentle this time, almost reverent. She melted into him, hands fisting in his shirt, trying to memorize the taste and feel of him. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be outside." "Eli, sleep." He pressed one more kiss to her forehead. "Dream of me," as if she could dream of anything else. Grace climbed back into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, listening to him settle on the porch. Her body ached with want, but beneath that was something else, something that felt dangerously like love. Outside. Eli sat with his back to the door, guns loose in their holsters, watching the night. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, possibly violence. But tonight, Grace Holloway slept safe in her bed, and that was worth any price he might have to pay, even if that price was his life. The morning after Eli's night watch, Grace woke to find him gone, only the impression of his body against her door and the lingering scent of leather and gunpowder proving he'd been there at all. She dressed with shaking hands, knowing that by noon the town would witness whatever confrontation Judd Haynes had planned. Word had spread like wildfire. By the time Grace drove her wagon into Mercy's Bend, the streets were lined with spectators, women clustered in doorways, whispering behind their hands. Men lounged against storefronts with studied casualness, hands never far from their guns, shameless. "Mrs." Baker hissed as Grace passed. "Absolutely shameless." Grace kept her eyes forward, chin high, but inside she trembled. She'd crossed a line last night, several lines, and there was no going back. The whole town knew she'd taken Eli's side against Judd Haynes, knew he'd spent the night at her ranch. The conclusions they'd drawn were written in every scandalized glance, every cutting whisper. She stationed herself outside the general store, where she could see the saloon clearly. The clock tower showed 5 minutes to noon when Eli appeared, walking down Main Street with that easy confidence that made her heart race. He'd dressed carefully, clean shirt, fresh shave, guns tied down but not threatening. He touched his hat brim to her as he passed, and she saw several women fan themselves despite the heat. Judd Haynes waited in front of the saloon, flanked by 6 of his men. He'd squeezed himself into his best suit, gold watch chain glinting in the sun. The contrast between the two men was stark. Judd all bluster and excess, Eli lean and dangerous as a blade. "Mr. Mercer," Judd's voice carried clearly. "Good of you to come. You wanted to talk." Eli stopped just out of reach, balanced on the balls of his feet. "Talk. Inside. This is a private matter." "Nothing private about it when you send 4 men to fetch me. We talk here or not at all." Judd's face reddened. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, eager for drama. "Very well. You've been asking questions about me, about my business. I don't appreciate strangers stirring up trouble. Truth isn't trouble, unless you've got something to hide." "The truth," Judd sneered, "is that you're a hired gun sniffing around a widow's skirts, looking for an easy score. Well, I've got news for you. Grace Holloway and her land are under my protection. Funny, she doesn't seem to want your protection. Women don't always know what's best for them. Her husband didn't either. Look where it got him." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Grace saw Eli's hand twitch toward his gun. Then still, "Is that a confession, Haynes?" "It's a warning. Sam Holloway thought he could stand against me, thought that worthless piece of scrub was worth dying for. He was wrong." Judd stepped forward, lowering his voice though it still carried. "I'm a reasonable man. Leave town today, and I'll make it worth your while. $500 to ride out and never come back. And if I don't, then you'll learn the same lesson Sam did. The hard way." Sheriff Wilson pushed through the crowd. "That sounded like a threat. Judd." Just a friendly warning. Sheriff, man should know the history of the place he's courting trouble in. Eli smiled, cold as winter wind. Here's a history lesson for you. Haynes, I've killed better men than you for less cause, but I don't shoot fat merchants in the street like a common murderer. When I come for you, and I will, it'll be legal, with proof of what you did to Sam Holloway. Proof? Judd laughed, belly shaking. Good luck finding any. Dead men tell no tales. No, but telegraph offices keep records. Banks remember transactions, and somewhere out there is the man you paid to pull the trigger. Eli's voice dropped, deadly quiet. I'll find him, Haynes, and when I do, you'll hang for murder. Judd's bravado cracked. You can't prove anything. Watch me. For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then Judd stepped back, forcing a laugh. Empty threats from an empty man. Sheriff, I trust you'll keep the peace. Wilson looked tired. Everyone go about your business. Show's over. The crowd began to disperse reluctantly. Grace started toward Eli, but Reverend Matthews intercepted her. Mrs. Holloway, a word. Not now. Reverend? Yes, now. His grip on her arm was surprisingly strong. You were not in church yesterday. I was tending my ranch. You were tending to that. He jerked his chin toward Eli. The whole town knows he spent the night at your place. Have you no shame? Have you no charity? She wrenched free. Judge not. Reverend, isn't that what your book says? The Bible also speaks of the wages of sin. You've chosen your path, Grace Holloway. But know this, the church's doors are now closed to you. You're no longer welcome in God's house. The words hit like a physical blow. Grace had expected judgment, gossip, social cuts, but to be cast out entirely, to be denied even the comfort of worship. Then I'll find God elsewhere, she managed. You'll find damnation, you and your gunfighter both. He stalked away, leaving her standing alone in the street. No, not alone. Eli was there, his hand warm on her elbow. Come on, let me take you home. I have supplies to buy. They can wait. She let him guide her to the wagon, aware of every eye following them. Mrs. Morrison stood in her doorway, face twisted with malicious satisfaction. Tom Morrison himself looked away when she passed. Even people who'd been cordial before now turned their backs. They rode out of town in silence, Eli on his bay keeping pace with her wagon. Only when they'd left Mercy's Bend behind did Grace let the tears fall. I'm sorry, Eli said quietly. For what? Standing up to Judd? Trying to find justice for Samuel? For ruining you? She laughed bitterly. I was ruined the day Samuel died. This just makes it official. They reached the ranch as clouds began building on the horizon, promising another storm. Grace unhitched the horses mechanically, movements sharp with suppressed emotion. Eli helped in silence, but she could feel him watching her. Say it, she finally snapped. Say what? That I should leave, that I should take your advice and Judd's money and start over somewhere else, that this land isn't worth becoming a pariah. Is that what you want to hear? I want to hear the truth. He caught her shoulders, turning her to face him. The truth is that you're the strongest woman I've ever known. The truth is that watching you stand there while that sanctimonious preacher condemned you made me want to burn the whole town down. The truth is that I'd kill every last one of them before I'd let them break you. I'm already broken. No. He cupped her face, thumbs wiping away tears. Bent, maybe, battered, but not broken. Never broken. She kissed him then, desperate and hungry, not caring who might see. He responded with equal fervor, backing her against the wagon, hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with promise. Marry me, the words hung between them, shocking in their simplicity. What? Marry me, Grace, today, now. We'll ride to the next town, find a justice of the peace, make it legal before God and man. Eli, I'm serious. He gripped her hands. They want to call you a fallen woman? Fine. Fall with me. Be my wife. Let me protect you the only way I know how. You don't have to. This isn't about have to. This is about want. He pulled her close. I want you in my bed every night and across my breakfast table every morning. I want the right to kill anyone who speaks ill of you. I want your name linked with mine so thoroughly that they can't hurt one without hurting both. You barely know me. I know enough. Know you're brave and stubborn and beautiful. Know you kiss like salvation and fight like damnation. Know I'd rather face a dozen Judd Haynes than spend another night without the right to hold you. Thunder rumbled overhead. Grace looked up at the darkening sky, then back at his face. In 2 years of widowhood, she'd built walls of propriety and grief. Now this man was offering to tear them all down, to give her a new name, a new chance. Yes. His eyes widened. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to your bed and your breakfast table. Yes to whatever comes next. She laughed, wild and free. But not today. Today we're going to batten down for this storm. Tomorrow we'll scandalize them properly. He kissed her again. Softer this time, full of promise. Tomorrow then. The storm broke as they finished securing the animals. They ran for the cabin, soaked within seconds, laughing like children. Inside, Grace lit the lamp while Eli built up the fire. The domesticity of it made her heart ache with possibility. I should go back to town, he said. Preserve what's left of your reputation for one more night. No. She moved to him, hands splaying across his wet shirt. Stay. They already think the worst. Why deny ourselves for their sake? Grace, I've been alone for 2 years. Eli, cold and alone and half dead with propriety. Tomorrow I'll be your wife. Tonight. She went up on her toes, lips brushing his ear. Tonight I want to be your woman. He shuddered, hands tightening on her waist. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, another kind of storm was building. Eli's hands were gentle as he unpinned her hair, letting it fall in damp waves around her shoulders. His lips found her throat, and she gasped, fingers digging into his shoulders. Beautiful, he murmured against her skin. My beautiful, brave Grace. Piece by piece, barriers fell away. Clothes puddled on the floor. Shyness gave way to hunger. When he lifted her, carrying her to the bed, she felt like a different woman entirely. Not the grieving widow, not the respectable rancher, just Grace, alive and wanting and finally warm. The night stretched long and sweet, filled with discovery. Eli was patient, thorough, teaching her pleasures Samuel had never imagined. She learned the map of his scars, the places that made him groan, the way his control could shatter with just a touch. When dawn broke, they lay entwined, watching the light creep across the floor. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Regrets? Eli asked, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Never. She turned in his arms, studying his face. Though we should probably get dressed before we shock whatever gossip comes calling. Let them come. They'll have to get used to seeing me here. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Grace scrambled for her nightgown while Eli pulled on his pants, gun already in hand. Mrs. Holloway? Sheriff Wilson's voice, carefully neutral. Need to speak with you, both of you. Grace's heart sank. She pulled on a wrapper, trying to smooth her wild hair, knowing it was useless. Everyone would know what had happened here. Eli opened the door, shirtless and defiant. Sheriff, early for a social call. Wilson's weathered face was grim. Got bad news. There's been a fire in town. The church. It burned down last night. What? Grace pushed forward. How? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Reverend Matthews is saying... He paused, looking uncomfortable. He's saying you did it. You and Mercer. Says you threatened him yesterday. And last night, his church burned. That's insane, Grace protested. We were here all night. Together? Heat flooded her cheeks, but she raised her chin. Yes, together. Wilson sighed. Figured as much. But Matthews has worked folks into a lather. There's talk of vigilante justice. You might want to make yourself scarce until things cool down. We're getting married today, Eli said flatly. Soon as we can find someone to do it. Congratulations, Wilson said dryly. But I'd postpone the honeymoon. Judd's using this to turn the town against you completely. Says you're both dangerous. Need to be run out before more property gets destroyed. We didn't burn his church, Grace said. I believe you, but belief doesn't stop a mob. Wilson settled his hat. I'll do what I can to keep the peace, but watch your backs, both of you. After he left, Grace sank into a chair, the happiness of the night evaporating like morning dew. They'll never stop, not until we're gone or dead. Then we make our stand. Eli knelt before her, taking her hands. Together, man and wife, let them come. She looked into his eyes, saw the steel there, the absolute determination. Yesterday she'd been alone, fighting a losing battle. Today she had a partner, someone who'd stand with her against whatever came. Together, she agreed. Outside, smoke still rose from the direction of town, black against the morning sky. The war for Mercy's Bend had begun in earnest. And Grace Holloway, soon to be Grace Mercer, was done running. Let them come indeed. The attack came 3 nights later, under a new moon that left the ranch in darkness. Grace woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses. Too many horses. She reached for Eli, but his side of the bed was empty, still warm. Get down. His voice cracked through the night like a whip. The window exploded in a shower of glass. Grace rolled off the bed, grabbing the rifle they'd taken to keeping loaded by the nightstand. Outside, orange flames licked at the barn walls, casting dancing shadows across the yard. The horses! She started for the door, but Eli caught her. Stay inside. They're using the fire to draw us out. He pressed a pistol into her hands. Watch the back door. Shoot anyone who comes through. Another window shattered. Grace heard whooping, the thunder of hooves circling the cabin. How many? 6? 8? Too many for 2 people to hold off. Eli crouched by the front window, rifle steady. The crack of his shot was followed by a scream and the sound of a body hitting dirt. Return fire peppered the cabin walls, and Grace pressed herself flat against the floor. Widow Holloway! Judd Haynes's voice carried over the chaos. Come out, and this ends quick. Stay in there and burn with your killer boyfriend. Go to hell, Haynes, she shouted back. Already been? Didn't care for the company. His laugh was ugly. Last chance. Grace, walk out now. Sign over the deed, and you can leave with your life. Maybe I'll even let your gunfighter go, if he runs fast enough. Eli fired again, and another scream split the night. That's 2 down. Haynes, want to try for 3? Burn it! Burn it all! More torches flew through the night. One crashed through the kitchen window, oil spreading across Grace's clean floor. She grabbed a blanket, smothering the flames before they could catch, but smoke was already filling the cabin. The barn was fully ablaze now, the screams of trapped horses terrible in the night. Grace's heart broke, but there was nothing to be done. They were fighting for their lives. Grace! Eli's warning came just as the back door burst open. She spun, firing instinctively. The man in the doorway clutched his shoulder, gun dropping from nerveless fingers. She recognized him as one of Judd's regular thugs, the one who'd propositioned her at the general store last month. No time for mercy now. She fired again, and he fell. Good girl, Eli said grimly, still watching the front. How many rounds left? 3. She checked the pistol. 5 in this. Not enough. He made a decision. When I say run, we go for the root cellar. It's stone, partially underground. They can't burn us out there. They'll surround us. Better than roasting. Another exchange of gunfire. Ready? Now! They burst from the cabin together. Grace saw mounted figures wheeling in the firelight, heard bullets whistle past. The root cellar was 20 yards away. An eternity of open ground. Halfway there, Eli stumbled. Grace caught his arm, felt wetness, blood. Go, he gasped, still firing one-handed. Not without you. She half-dragged him the last few yards, tumbling down the cellar steps. Bullets chipped stone around them as she slammed the heavy door shut. Dropping the bar, the cellar was pitch black, musty with stored vegetables and preserves. Grace felt along the shelves until she found the oil lamp and matches they kept there. In the yellow glow, she saw Eli slumped against the wall, hand pressed to his side. "Let me see. It's not bad." But his face was pale, sweat beading his forehead. She pulled his hand away, bit back a cry. The bullet had caught him just below the ribs, blood flowing steady but not pumping. Not immediately fatal, but bad enough. "We need to stop the bleeding." She tore strips from her nightgown, packing the wound. Eli hissed through his teeth but didn't protest. Outside, they could hear Judd's men circling, debating. The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames visible through the cellar's single small window. Her home, Samuel's books, everything they'd built, gone. "Haynes," Eli called out, voice still strong. "You've made your point. Let the lady go. This is between you and me. Noble of you, gunfighter. But Grace made her choice. She stands with you. She falls with you. At least face us like a man instead of hiding behind hired guns." Rich talked from a hired gun himself. Judd's voice came closer. "Tell you what, Mercer, come out, and I'll make it quick. 1 bullet, nice and clean. Better than bleeding out in a hole." "Counteroffer." Eli shifted, checking his gun. "You confess to killing Sam Holloway, and I'll let you live." Silence. Then Judd laughed. "Sam was a fool. Thought his principles mattered more than profit. I gave him every chance to sell, but he refused. Said the land was his legacy to Grace." The contempt in his voice was thick, as if that wasteland was worth dying for. "So you had him killed. I had a problem solved. Jackson, rest his soul, was good at solving problems. Until you killed him in the street the other day." Grace gasped. The man Eli had shot during the confrontation. He'd been Samuel's killer. "That's convenient." Eli said, "Dead men can't testify." "No, but you got your confession. For all the good it'll do you in hell." Judd raised his voice. "Boys, smoke them out. Build a fire at the door if you have to." Grace heard wood being piled against the cellar door. Soon smoke would seep through the cracks, forcing them out into the guns. She gripped Eli's hand, feeling her hope die. Then hoofbeats, lots of them, coming fast. "Riders coming," one of Judd's men shouted. "What? Who?" Judd's words cut off in a curse. Gunfire erupted above, but different now. Judd's men were shooting at someone else. Grace heard shouts, screams, the thunder of a full cavalry charge. "United States Marshal!" A new voice, hard with authority. "Drop your weapons, all of you." "Marshal?" Judd sounded strangled. "What are you doing here?" "Got a telegram about suspicious activity. Something about a man named Haynes involved in murder and land fraud. Looks like I arrived just in time." More gunfire. Then the sound of weapons hitting dirt. Grace looked at Eli in amazement. He managed a pained smile. "Told you I sent telegrams. One went to the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver. Guess they take murder seriously." The cellar door shook. "Anyone down there?" "2 wounded," Grace called out. "It's safe." The bar lifted, door swinging open. A man with a marshal's star helped them out, eyes widening at Eli's wound. "Get the doc," he barked to someone. The yard was chaos. 3 of Judd's men lay dead, the others kneeling with hands behind their heads. The barn was collapsed into glowing embers. The cabin a total loss. Everything Grace had fought to keep. Gone, but she was alive. Eli was alive. And Judd Haynes was in irons, his face purple with rage and fear. "This is a mistake," he blustered. "I'm a respected businessman. These 2 are the criminals. They burned the church." "Funny thing about that," the marshal said. "Found evidence it was set from inside, lamp oil from the Reverend's own office. Almost like someone wanted to frame somebody else." Reverend Matthews pushed forward from the crowd of townspeople who'd followed the marshal. His face was ashen. That's impossible." "Is it?" The marshal's eyes were hard. Or did Haynes pay you to burn your own church? Promise to build you a bigger one?" The Reverend's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Then his shoulders slumped. He said no one would be hurt. Said it would turn the town against them for good. Well, it turned all right. Turned into attempted murder and federal charges. The marshal nodded to his men. "Take them both." As Judd was dragged past, he spat at Grace's feet. "This isn't over. I have lawyers, connections. You'll never prove." Jackson confessed before he died. Eli said quietly, "That first day in town, when I shot him, he lived long enough to tell Sheriff Wilson, who paid him to kill Sam Holloway. Wilson's been gathering evidence ever since, keeping quiet so you wouldn't run. It was a lie. Grace knew, but Judd didn't. His face went white, then red, then white again. You're lying." "Am I?" Sheriff Wilson stepped out of the crowd, face grave. "Jackson did speak before he died, said enough to hang you. Judd, I've got it all written down, witnessed and signed." Another lie, Grace realized. The whole town conspiring to bring down the man who'd held them under his thumb for so long. She saw Tom Morrison in the crowd, Mrs. Baker, even Mrs. Morrison, all the people who'd whispered and judged, now standing witness to justice. Doc Morrison arrived, immediately tending to Eli. "Bullet's still in there. Need to get him to my office." "Grace." Eli reached for her. "I'm here." She gripped his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." As they loaded him into a wagon, she looked back at the ruins of her home. 2 years of struggle, reduced to ash and ember. But somehow, she felt lighter than she had since Samuel's death. "Your ranch, Mrs." Morrison said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "I'm so sorry." Grace waited for the satisfaction. The "told you so." Instead, the older woman looked genuinely grieved. "We all knew Judd was no good, Mrs." Morrison continued. "But we were scared. Of him, of standing out, of being like you, brave. I wasn't brave. I was stubborn. Sometimes they're the same thing." She pressed something into Grace's hand. "The church fund. We were saving for new pews, but, well, you need it more." Grace looked down at the small purse, heavy with coins. "I can't." "You can. You will. This town owes you more than money. Grace Holloway. But it's a start." Others came forward. $1 here, 5 there. Someone offered a place to stay. Someone else promised lumber for rebuilding. The same people who'd shunned her now offering support, shamed by her courage and their cowardice. "Thank you," Grace managed through tears. "All of you." She climbed into the wagon beside Eli, cradling his head in her lap as they rode toward town. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady. "Hear that?" she whispered. "We won." His eyes opened, dark with pain, but clear. "No, Grace, you won. You stood when everyone else would have run. You fought when they said surrender. You loved when they said hate." His hand found hers. "I just tried to keep up. Fool man," she said fondly. "My fool man. Yours." He agreed. "If you'll still have me, a gunfighter with a bullet in his gut isn't much of a husband. He is if he's mine." The sun was rising as they reached town, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The smoke from the ranch was a distant smudge on the horizon, the past burning away to make room for the future. Grace Holloway had lost her home but kept her land, lost her reputation but found her courage, lost her first husband but found a love worth fighting for. And as she held Eli's hand while Doc Morrison worked to save his life, she knew that sometimes you had to lose everything to find what really mattered. The deed was still hers. The land was still hers. And if God was merciful, the man she loved would survive to help her build something new on the ashes of the old. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The courtroom was packed to overflowing. Citizens of Mercy's Bend cramming into every available space. Grace sat in the front row, back straight, wearing the new dress the town women had pooled money to buy her. Black again, but not for mourning. For justice. Eli sat beside her, still pale from his wound but steady. Doc Morrison had worked a miracle. pulling the bullet out and stitching him up. 3 weeks of recovery had left him thinner but no less dangerous looking. His hand found hers as Judge Crawford called the court to order. The territory of Colorado versus Judd Haynes. Charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and fraud. Judd sat at the defendant's table, his expensive lawyer from Denver looking increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. The marshal had been thorough, uncovering years of Judd's schemes, intimidation, forged documents, suspicious deaths that had been ruled accidents. "Call your first witness," Judge Crawford said. "The prosecution calls Mrs. Grace Holloway." Grace rose, smoothing her skirts. The walk to the witness stand felt like miles. She could feel every eye on her, some sympathetic, others still skeptical. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat. "Mrs. Holloway," the prosecutor began, "tell us about your late husband's dispute with Mr. Haynes." Grace's voice started soft but grew stronger as she spoke. She told of Samuel's dreams for the ranch, his refusal to sell to Judd, the increasing pressure, the threats, the dead cattle they'd found poisoned. "Samuel wanted to go to the law," she said, "but Judd owned half the town. Who would listen?" Objection. Judd's lawyer called. Speculation. Sustained. Grace continued, describing the night Samuel died. "He went to meet someone about the water rights. Said he had a witness who'd testify that Judd was diverting water illegally. He kissed me goodbye and never came back. And when you found him," her voice broke, "shot in the back. His horse came home without him. I found him by Willow Creek, already cold." The courtroom was silent. Grace felt Eli's presence like a steady flame, giving her strength. "What happened after your husband's death?" "Judd came calling the very next day, offered to buy the ranch. Said a widow couldn't manage alone. When I refused, he said I'd regret it." She detailed the harassment, the cut fences, the poisoned well, the marriage proposals that felt like threats, the way the town had slowly turned against her, fed by Judd's whispers and bribes. "Then Mr. Mercer arrived," the prosecutor said. "Tell us about that." Grace's eyes found Eli. "He was different. Didn't want anything from me. Just saw me. Not the widow, not the landowner, just me." "And Judd Haynes' reaction?" "He saw Eli as a threat, sent men to intimidate him, to run him off. When that didn't work," she described the night of the fire, the attack on the ranch. "He admitted it," she said firmly. "When he thought we were trapped, he admitted to having Samuel killed. Said Jackson did it on his orders." "Objection." Judd's lawyer was on his feet. "Hearsay. I was there." Grace shot back. "I heard every word." "As did I," Eli called out, earning a sharp look from the judge. "Mr. Mercer will have his turn," Judge Crawford said sternly. The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, painting her as a desperate woman who'd taken up with a gunfighter, who'd do anything to keep her land, but Grace held firm, answering each insinuation with calm truth. When she stepped down, other witnesses followed. Sheriff Wilson, who'd been quietly investigating for months. The banker, who testified about Judd's attempts to illegally foreclose on the Holloway Ranch. Even Mrs. Morrison, who tearfully admitted to spreading gossip at Judd's request. Then Eli took the stand. "State your name and occupation." "Eli Mercer, currently rancher, previously gun for hire." A murmur ran through the crowd. The prosecutor looked nervous. "You admit to being a hired gun." "I've killed men for money," Eli said bluntly. "Not proud of it, but I won't lie. That's how I recognized Jackson that first day. We'd worked together before, and he attacked you. On Judd's orders." "Jackson was never subtle. He went for his gun. I was faster." Eli's voice was matter-of-fact. "Before he died, he said enough to confirm what I suspected about Sam Holloway's death." "Which was?" "That Judd paid him to do it. $500 for a backshot murder." The defense attorney pounced. "You claim a dying man confessed to you? How convenient." "Not to me," Eli corrected. "To Sheriff Wilson. I was just there to hear it." Wilson was recalled, confirming the story. The defense tried to claim conspiracy, but the judge overruled. As the evidence mounted, Judd grew more agitated. When the prosecutor introduced documents showing his water theft, his illegal land grabs, his bribes to officials, Judd finally exploded. "Enough!" He lurched to his feet, face purple. "Yes, I had Sam Holloway killed. Man was a fool, standing between me and progress. This whole town would be nothing without me. I made Mercy's Bend what it is." "Sit down, Mr. Haynes," Judge Crawford ordered. But Judd was beyond caring. "That land belongs to me. I worked for it, schemed for it, killed for it. And this uppity widow thinks she can keep it? Her and her killer boyfriend?" "Mr. Haynes," his lawyer pleaded. "Shut up!" Judd turned on Grace. "You should have taken my offer. Should have married me when you had the chance. Now look what you've done. Destroyed everything I built." "No," Grace said quietly, standing. "You destroyed yourself, with greed and pride and the belief that money made you untouchable. Samuel was worth 10 of you. Samuel was weak. Samuel was good, and that terrified you." She faced him fully, no longer afraid. "You killed him because he wouldn't bend, but you didn't count on me, the weak little widow who was supposed to fold." "Bailiff, restrain the defendant," Judge Crawford ordered as Judd lunged forward. It took 3 men to drag Judd out, still screaming threats and curses. The courtroom sat in stunned silence until the judge cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough. Jury, do you need to deliberate?" The foreman stood. "No, Your Honor. We find Judd Haynes guilty on all counts." The gavel fell like thunder. "Judd Haynes, you are sentenced to hang for the murder of Samuel Holloway. May God have mercy on your soul." Grace sagged against Eli, suddenly exhausted. It was over. 2 years of fighting, of suspicion, of grief. Over. As they left the courthouse, the town parted before them. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away, ashamed of their part in Judd's reign. Reverend Matthews waited by the door. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, then stopped. "I owe you an apology. I let fear and Judd's money corrupt my calling. I'm resigning. A new minister will come, one who might deserve your forgiveness." Grace studied him, seeing a broken man. "We all make choices. Reverend, the question is what we do after." He nodded and shuffled away. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Their borrowed wagon waited, loaded with supplies for rebuilding. "Ready to go home?" Eli asked. "What home? It's all ash and ruin." "No." He turned her to face him. "Home isn't buildings. It's land that's yours. Honestly won. It's a future we'll build together. It's—" He pulled out a simple gold ring. "It's wherever you are, if you'll have me." "Eli Mercer, are you proposing again?" "Properly this time, in front of God and everybody." He went to one knee right there on Main Street. "Grace Holloway, you've already said yes in private. Make it public. Marry me." A crowd was gathering, but Grace didn't care. "You impossible man. Yes, yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her soundly. Someone cheered, then another. Soon the whole street was applauding, the sound washing away months of whispers and condemnation. They were married 3 days later by the circuit judge, with Sheriff Wilson and his wife as witnesses. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by the seamstress who'd once refused to serve her. Eli wore a new suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. The ceremony was simple, the reception more so. But as they danced in the church hall, rebuilt already through community effort, Grace felt richer than Judd Haynes had ever been. "No regrets?" Eli asked, holding her close. "Never. You?" "Only one." At her alarmed look, he smiled. "I regret it took so long to find you." They left town as the sun set, driving toward the ranch. The burned timbers had been cleared, a new foundation already laid. It would take months to rebuild, but they had time. They had each other. As they crested the hill overlooking their land, Eli pulled up the horses. Below them, the ranch stretched out in the fading light. Their neighbors had been busy. A temporary shelter stood where the cabin had been. The well had been cleaned. New fencing begun. It's not much, Eli said, but it's a start. It's perfect. Grace leaned against him. Samuel would be glad. He always said this land would bloom someday. We'll make it bloom. Together. They sat there as stars began to appear. Two souls who'd found each other across loss and pain. Tomorrow would bring hard work, challenges, the slow task of building a life. But tonight, they were home. Grace thought of the woman she'd been. The grieving widow, alone and afraid. That woman was gone, burned away like the old cabin. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd faced down a killer, a town's judgment, her own fears. What are you thinking? Eli asked. That I'm grateful. For justice. For fire. She smiled at his confusion. It burned everything I was holding on to. The grief, the fear, the walls I'd built. Without it, I'd never have found the courage to reach for what I wanted. And what's that? She kissed him, long and sweet. You. This, a future I choose instead of one forced on me. Then here's to fire, Eli said, pulling her closer, and to the women who rise from the ashes, and the men brave enough to love them. They drove down to their land as the moon rose, silver and full. Behind them, Mercy's Bend settled into sleep, forever changed by one woman's refusal to break. Ahead lay years of work and joy, children who would run these hills, crops that would finally make the desert bloom. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, there was only the creak of wagon wheels, the whisper of wind through sage, and two hearts beating as one in the vast, wild darkness of the frontier. Grace Holloway Mercer was home at last, and she would never stand alone again. The next morning brought the first of many. Eli was already up when Grace woke, working on the temporary corral. She watched from the doorway, memorizing the way the early light caught in his dark hair, the easy strength in his movements. "Coffee's on," he called without turning. Such as it is in a pot over an open fire. Better than no coffee at all. She joined him, accepting the tin cup gratefully. What's the plan for today? Foundation for the barn. Wilson's bringing a crew to help. Should have walls up by week's end. And the house? He turned to her, expression serious. What do you want, Grace? We could rebuild just like it was. Or we build something new, bigger, room for the family we might have. A real kitchen, not just a corner with a stove. Windows facing east to catch the sunrise. That sounds expensive. The marshal says there's a bounty on some of the men I encountered over the years. Enough to build properly, maybe buy some good breeding stock. Grace considered. The old cabin had been Samuel's dream, built with his hands and hopes. But that life was gone, and she was no longer the woman who'd lived it. Something new, she decided. But keep the root cellar. It saved our lives, and nearly ended them. But he smiled. New it is, Mrs. Mercer. The name still sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Mercer. Not the widow Holloway anymore. A new name for a new life, as if summoned by her thoughts. Riders appeared on the horizon. Not just Wilson, but what looked like half the town. Wagons loaded with lumber, men with tools, women with food baskets. What's all this? Grace asked as they arrived. Tom Morrison jumped down from his wagon, looking sheepish. Town meeting last night. Decided we owed you more than apologies. Figured we'd help put right what we let go wrong. Even Mrs. Baker was there, her usual sour expression replaced by determination. That Haynes poisoned this town for years, made us all complicit in his evil. Least we can do is help clean up the mess. And help they did. By sunset, the barn frame was up. The house foundation expanded and leveled. Women who'd whispered behind Grace's back now worked beside her, sharing recipes and gossip as if the past months had never happened. People need someone to show them courage, Wilson said. Taking a break from hammering. You did that, Grace. Stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Town won't forget. I hope they do forget, Grace said. I'd rather be known for what we build than what we survived. But some things couldn't be forgotten. As the sun set and the workers prepared to leave, a lone rider approached. Grace tensed, hand moving instinctively to where her pistol would be. "Easy," Eli murmured. "Just a kid." Indeed, the rider was young, maybe 16, with Judd's broad face but honest eyes. He stopped at a respectful distance, hat in hand. "Mrs. Mercer? I'm Paul Haynes, Judd's nephew." Silence fell over the gathering. Eli stepped slightly forward, hand casual but ready. "I know I'm not welcome," the boy continued, "but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For what my uncle did, for what my family let him do. We knew he was hard, but we never imagined." "You're not responsible for your uncle's crimes," Grace said carefully. "Maybe not, but I benefited from them. We all did." He pulled out a rolled document. "This is the deed to the water rights my uncle stole. They belong to your ranch. Always did." Grace took the document with shaking hands. Water rights in this dry land were worth more than gold. "There's more," Paul said. "My aunt wants to leave town, start fresh somewhere. She's willing to sell Uncle's land cheap. You'd have first option." "Why?" Eli asked bluntly. "Because it's right. Because my cousins deserve to grow up somewhere they won't be known as the killer's kin. And because," he looked at Grace, "because Mrs. Mercer showed us that one person standing up to evil can change everything. I want to be someone who stands up, not someone who looks away." Grace felt tears threaten. This boy, asking for a redemption that wasn't even his to seek. "Thank you. Paul, tell your aunt we'll discuss fair terms. And tell her I hold no grudge against Judd's family. The sins were his alone." Paul's relief was palpable. "Thank you, ma'am, sir." He wheeled his horse and rode off into the gathering dark. "Well," Wilson said into the silence. "That was unexpected." "Grace has that effect," Eli said, pride warm in his voice. "Makes people want to be better than they are." The workers dispersed with promises to return tomorrow. Soon, it was just Grace and Eli again, standing amid the skeletons of new buildings. With Judd's land and the water rights, this could be the biggest ranch in the county, Eli mused. "Is that what you want? To be a cattle baron?" He pulled her close. "I want you happy. I want you safe. I want to wake up beside you for the next 50 years. Everything else is just details. Then we have everything we need." They stood together as the stars came out, on land honestly won, with a future honestly earned. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. There would be hard winters and dry summers, calves to birth and crops to tend. But there would also be laughter in a new kitchen, children playing in the yard, neighbors who'd become friends. There would be Sunday dinners and harvest dances, quiet evenings on the porch and passionate nights in their bed. Grace Holloway had refused every man who'd tried to cage her. But Eli Mercer hadn't offered a cage. He'd offered partnership, equality, a love that strengthened rather than diminished. And so the widow who'd stood alone found herself part of something larger, not just a marriage, but a community, not just survival, but a life worth living. As they walked hand in hand to their temporary shelter, Grace looked back at the work site. By next month, it would be a home. By next year, a thriving ranch. By next decade, a legacy for the children they'd raise. All because she'd refused to break. All because a stranger had ridden in and seen her truly. All because sometimes, the greatest courage is simply saying yes to the future, whatever it might bring. "No regrets?" Eli asked again. A ritual between them now. "Never," Grace replied, as she always would. "Only gratitude." And under the vast western sky, with their whole lives stretching ahead like an open trail, that was more than enough. It was everything. 1 year later, the Mercer Ranch stood transformed, where ash and ruin had been. A proper house rose 2 stories tall, with windows facing east as Eli had promised. The barn was bigger than before, filled with good horses and cattle bought with honest money. Fields that had lain fallow now showed the first green shoots of wheat and the kitchen garden Grace tended promised vegetables come summer. But the greatest change was in Grace herself. The severe bun was gone, replaced by a softer style that let her auburn hair catch the light. The widow's weeds had given way to practical calico in blues and greens that brought out her eyes. And those eyes, once shadowed with grief, now held warmth and laughter and something else, a secret she'd been carrying for 2 months now. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Eli work with the new horses. He'd taken to ranching like he'd been born to it, his hands as gentle with animals as they'd once been deadly with guns. The scar on his face had faded to silver, and the darkness that had clung to him when they met had lifted, replaced by a quiet contentment she'd never thought to see. "You planning to tell him sometime today? Or are you waiting for him to guess?" Grace turned to find Mary Wilson, the sheriff's wife, smiling knowingly from the doorway. In the past year, Mary had become her closest friend, one of the few who'd stood by her even in the darkest days. "How did you know? Honey, you've been glowing like a lamp for weeks. And when you turned green at the smell of bacon last Sunday," Mary laughed. "Trust me, every woman in town knows. We're just waiting for you to admit it." Grace pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "I wanted to be sure, after trying for so long with Samuel and nothing." "That wasn't your fault, and you know it. Sometimes it's just about the right man at the right time." Mary squeezed her shoulder. "Eli's going to be over the moon. Or terrified." Grace bit her lip. "He's never spoken of children, and with the life he's led, that life is over. He's a rancher now, a husband, soon to be a father. The man who rode into Mercy's Bend looking for easy prey is gone. You changed him. Grace." "We changed each other." The sound of horses drew their attention. Eli was riding in with Tom Morrison and several other men, all laughing at something Tom had said. The easy camaraderie still surprised Grace sometimes. The gunfighter who'd stood alone against the world now had friends, neighbors who respected him, a place in the community. "Ladies," Eli touched his hat brim, but his eyes were all for Grace. Even after a year of marriage, he still looked at her like she was a miracle. "Tom's brought news from town." "Good news, I hope?" Mary asked. Tom's grin widened. "The best. Paul Haynes wrote from San Francisco. He's opened a shipping business with his mother's backing. Wants to partner with local ranchers, help get our beef to market at better prices. The boy's making good on his promise to stand up." Eli mused. "Takes courage to build something new on the ashes of the old." Grace met his eyes, thinking of all they'd built on their own ashes. "Yes, it does." The men headed to the barn to discuss business, leaving the women alone. Grace served coffee and the apple pie she'd mastered over months of practice, but her mind was elsewhere. "Just tell him," Mary urged. "The man fought off 8 gunmen for you. I don't think a baby will scare him." But it was evening before Grace found her courage. They sat on the new porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Eli had his arm around her, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "It's been a good year," he said quietly. "The best." She agreed. Then, before she could lose her nerve, "It's about to get better." He turned to look at her, eyebrow raised. "Oh?" "Eli." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The silence stretched so long she began to worry. Then Eli was on his feet, pulling her up into his arms, spinning her around while laughing like she'd never heard him laugh. "A baby," he said wonderingly when he finally set her down. "Our baby. You're happy?" "Happy." He cupped her face in his hands, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Grace, I've done terrible things in my life, things I'll answer for someday, but somehow, despite all that, I've been given you, and now this." He dropped to his knees, pressing his lips to her stomach. "I don't deserve this much happiness." "Yes, you do." She ran her fingers through his hair. "We both do. We've earned it." He stood, pulling her close. "When?" "Winter. December. Mary thinks. A Christmas baby." His grin was boyish. "We'll need to add to the house. A nursery, maybe a room for a nurse. Eli, she laughed. We have time. No, we need to prepare. And you shouldn't be doing heavy work. I'll hire help for the garden and… She silenced him with a kiss. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Ranch women have been having babies since the frontier began. Not my woman, not carrying my child. The possessiveness in his voice should have annoyed her. Instead, it warmed her to her toes. They stood together as darkness fell, planning a future that seemed impossibly bright. Inside the house, lamps were lit, casting warm light through windows that had once been shattered by violence. The barn stood solid and whole where flames had consumed the old, and in Grace's womb, new life grew, the ultimate defiance of death and destruction. I wish Samuel could know, Grace said suddenly, that his land will have children on it, that his dream of making the desert bloom came true, just not the way he imagined. Eli's arm tightened around her. I think he knows. A man who loved poetry and dreamed of gardens. He'd understand that sometimes beauty comes from unexpected places, like a widow and a gunfighter, like a woman too strong to break and a man smart enough to recognize treasure when he found it. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, but the sound no longer spoke of loneliness and danger. Now it was just part of the night music, along with the cattle lowing and the wind in the grass. I love you, Grace said, words that still felt new and precious even after a year of saying them. And I love you. Eli turned her to face him. Both of you. They went inside, to the home they'd built together, to the bed they shared, to the life they'd carved out of loss and pain. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Running a ranch always did, but they'd face them together, as they'd faced everything else. Later, as Grace drifted off to sleep in Eli's arms, she thought about the woman she'd been that night 2 years ago, standing alone on her porch with a rifle, watching a stranger's fire through the trees. That woman had been so certain she needed no one, that strength meant standing alone. She'd been wrong. True strength was letting someone stand beside you. True courage was opening your heart after it had been shattered. True love was finding someone who saw your scars and called them beautiful. What are you thinking? Eli murmured, half asleep. About the night we met, how you looked at me and saw something I didn't even know was there. I saw a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd make any man work to earn her. And you did earn me. Every day, he said seriously. I earn you every day. She kissed him softly. And I earn you. Outside, the moon rose full and bright over the ranch. In the barn, horses shifted and settled. In the house, 2 hearts beat as one, soon to be joined by a third, and somewhere in the great beyond. Perhaps Samuel Holloway smiled, knowing his land had found its caretakers, his widow had found her happiness, and his dreams had taken root in ways he never could have imagined. The Mercer Ranch slept peaceful under stars that had witnessed so much: love and loss, violence and redemption, death and rebirth. But the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. For Grace and Eli, for their unborn child, for the community that had learned to choose courage over fear. In the morning, there would be coffee on the stove and work to be done. Eli would tend the horses while Grace gathered eggs. They'd work side by side through the day, building something lasting on the foundation of their love. And when evening came, they'd sit on their porch again, watching the sun set over land honestly won and honestly kept. No regrets. Never any regrets. Only gratitude for the fire that had burned away the old and made room for the new. Only joy in the love that had grown from the ashes. Only hope for all the tomorrows stretching ahead like an endless frontier, waiting to be explored. Grace Holloway had refused every man who'd tried to cage her, but Eli Mercer had offered her wings, and together, they'd learned to fly. The next morning brought nausea along with the sunrise. Grace barely made it to the wash basin before her stomach rebelled. Eli was there instantly, holding her hair, rubbing her back. Maybe we should go to town. Have Doc Morrison check you over, he fretted. It's normal, Grace assured him, rinsing her mouth. Mary says it passes after a few months. Months? He looked stricken. "You'll be sick for months," despite her discomfort. Grace laughed. "The man who faced down 8 gunmen is afraid of morning sickness? I knew how to fight gunmen. He gestured helplessly. "This is beyond my experience. Then we'll learn together, the way we've learned everything else." By the time she'd dressed and made it to the kitchen, Eli had attempted breakfast. The eggs were scorched. The biscuits could have been used as ammunition, but the effort touched her heart. "Perhaps I should handle the cooking," she suggested diplomatically. "Perhaps you should." He pulled her onto his lap. "My talents lie elsewhere." "Indeed they do." She agreed, then squeaked as he nuzzled her neck. "Eli, it's broad daylight." "So it is. Good thing we're married then." They were interrupted by hoofbeats in the yard. Eli set Grace on her feet and went to the window, relaxing when he saw who it was. "It's Paul Haynes," he said, surprised. "Thought he was in San Francisco." They met him on the porch. The young man had changed in the years since Judd's hanging. Gone was the uncertain boy. In his place stood a confident businessman in a city suit. "Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Mercer." He shook their hands warmly. "I hope you don't mind an unexpected visit." "Not at all," Grace said. "Come in. There's coffee and, well, attempt at breakfast." Paul grinned. "I ate at the hotel, but coffee would be welcome." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Grace and Eli had shared their first desperate kiss. So much had changed since then. "I'll get straight to the point," Paul said. "My shipping business is doing well. Very well. We're moving Texas cattle to California miners at prices that make everyone rich. But I need partners here. Reliable ranchers who can provide quality beef consistently." "And you thought of us?" Eli asked. "You're building the best herd in the county. Your reputation for honest dealing has reached even San Francisco." Paul pulled out a contract. "I'm offering you partnership terms. Better prices than you'll get anywhere else. Guaranteed purchase of your stock." Grace read through the terms. Her merchant father's training serving her well. "This is very generous." "It's business. But it's also—" Paul hesitated. "It's also my way of making things right. Uncle Judd got rich through cruelty and crime. I want to get rich through partnership and mutual benefit. Prove that the Haynes name can stand for something good." "You don't owe us anything," Eli said quietly. "You weren't responsible for your uncle's crimes. No, but I benefited from them. We all did. The least I can do is use that benefit to build something better." He looked at Grace. "You taught me that, Mrs. Mercer. That night you forgave my family, offered us a fresh start." It changed everything. Grace felt tears threaten. These pregnancy emotions were going to be troublesome. "We all deserve fresh starts." They signed the papers, shook hands, and Paul prepared to leave. At the door, he paused. "There's one more thing. I've been corresponding with a certain reverend who left Mercy's Bend in disgrace. Matthews is in Mexico now, building churches for mining camps. He asked me to give you this." He handed over a letter. Grace recognized the spidery handwriting. "He says he prays for you daily, that your courage in standing against evil inspired him to actually follow his calling instead of just preaching about it. He hopes someday you might forgive him." "Someday," Grace said softly. "Not today, but someday." After Paul left, they sat on the porch reading Matthew's letter. It was full of humility, repentance, and genuine faith, things that had been lacking in his Mercy's Bend sermons. "People can change," Eli observed. "Given the chance and the reason, we're proof of that." Grace leaned against him. "A bitter widow and a hired gun. Now respectable ranchers expecting a baby. Soon-to-be rich ranchers. If Paul's deal works out." "Do you want to be rich?" Eli considered. "I want our children to have choices. I want to build something that lasts beyond us. He smiled. "I want you to have that rose garden you've been sketching when you think I'm not looking." "You saw those. I see everything about you." He kissed her temple. "Roses it is. We'll make Samuel's dream of a blooming desert come true." They spent the morning planning where the garden would go, how they'd bring in water, what varieties might survive the harsh climate. It was dreaming. But the kind of dreaming that had built the West, practical dreams backed by hard work and determination. That evening, half the town showed up for what had become a weekly gathering. The women brought dishes to share, the men talked cattle and weather, and the children ran wild in the yard. It still amazed Grace sometimes, this community that had embraced them after everything. "When are you going to tell them?" Mary whispered, nodding at Grace's untouched plate. "Tell us what?" Mrs. Baker's ears were as sharp as ever, though her attitude had softened considerably. Grace looked at Eli, who nodded encouragingly. "We're expecting a baby." The explosion of congratulations was deafening. Women who'd once crossed the street to avoid her now crowded around with advice and offers of help. Men slapped Eli on the back, joking about sleepless nights and the trials of fatherhood. "About time this ranch had some little ones running around," Wilson said. "Place is too quiet." "Not for long," Eli replied, looking slightly overwhelmed by the attention. As the evening wore on, Grace found herself standing apart, watching the gathering. In the golden light of sunset, she could see it all, the past, the present, the future spreading out like a patchwork quilt. There was the spot where she'd first seen Eli's fire through the trees. There was where Judd's men had tried to burn them out. There was where Sheriff Wilson had told them about the church fire. So much pain and drama soaked into this soil. But now children played where gunmen had fallen. Laughter replaced gunfire. Hope had taken root where despair once flourished. "You all right?" Eli appeared at her elbow, concern in his eyes. "Perfect," she assured him. "Just thinking about how wrong I was. That night you camped by the creek. I thought I was defending my isolation. I thought strength meant standing alone. But look." She gestured at the gathering. "This is strength, community, connection, love. You had to walk through fire to find it. We both did." She took his hand. "And I'm glad. For all of it. Even the pain. Because it led us here." He spun her into his arms. "Right there in front of everyone. Dance with me, Mrs. Mercer. There's no music. Don't need any." So they danced in the yard while their friends smiled and the sun set behind the mountains. They danced like no one was watching, like they had all the time in the world, like love was the only music needed. And in Grace's womb, their child grew proof that life finds a way, that love conquers fear, that sometimes the best revenge against those who try to break you is simply to build something beautiful in the ruins they left behind. The widow who'd refused every man had found her match. The gunfighter who'd lived by violence had found his peace. And together, they'd written a love story for the ages. "No regrets," Eli whispered as they swayed together. "Never," Grace replied, as she always would. "Only joy." And under the vast western sky, with their friends around them and their future growing beneath her heart, that was more than enough. It was everything. It was home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Grace and Eli's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of love, courage, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of Grace's transformation from grieving widow to fierce survivor? Share your thoughts. I read every comment and love hearing your perspectives on these characters and their choices.